Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Hello everybody, my name is Peter Maris. I'm an academic at Monash University and I do this Talking Tendons podcast semi-regularly, and here goes the first one for 2019. In this one I'm going to be talking about a really interesting study that really blew my mind because I didn't understand a lot of it and took me lots of reads, and I always like those papers because you sort of learn the most from those ones. It's called Carbon-14 Bomb Pulse Dating Shows that tendinopathy is preceded by years of abnormally high collagen turnover. Just wanted to also mention that just a really shameless plug, the update of the Mastering Lower Limb Tendinopathy course is available now at tendinopathyrehab.com. Anyway, back to the show. So Carbon-14, this method of Carbon-14, what they call the bomb pulse method, effectively what they do is they look at people that were born or lived in the Cold War period, and because there was lots of nuclear testing going on, there's lots of carbon-14 in the atmosphere, and this is absorbed in some of their tissues and it basically stays there if the tissues are slow turnover tissues like tendon. And these guys showed that healthy tendons have carbon-14. If you're unlucky enough to be born in that nuclear testing period and you had unlucky enough to be born in that period, but lucky enough to have a healthy Achilles in that period, basically, if your Achilles was developing in that period, you would have this carbon-14 and it would be there. And then you're stuck with it when they sampled in like 1997 or whenever it was. So really, really interesting finding. And in this study, what they sought to do was to extend that finding by looking at tendinopathy samples as well. So all they've done is they've taken some tendinopathy people. So basically, we know that tendinopathy is thought to have a higher turnover of collagen because you've got more cells and more expression of collagen and less of the sort of some of these what they call advanced glycation end products and D-aspartic acid, which are signs of the age of the collagen matrix. So anyway, they sought to look at these tendinopathy samples with the bomb pulse technique. They took a bunch of tendinopathy samples and a few healthy samples, and they then looked at their carbon isotopes. But first they purified the collagen, so they took away the glycosaminoglycans because that has a higher turnover. So they took that away. So really neat study and really interesting methods. As I say, one of those studies that I have to read because these things don't come naturally to me, these lab methods, but are very, very interesting. So I'm going to cut to the chase, and I'm going to cut to the most interesting part, I think, of the results. So if we first focus on the healthy matrix turnover from the healthy tendons, they basically confirm what they found in the first study, and that was in 2013. I'll link these studies in the show notes as well, but basically the title of that study was Lack of Tissue Renewal in Human Adult Achilles Tendons is Revealed by Nuclear Bomb 14C. So in effect, they found here again in the healthy samples that if you're born in the time when there was nuclear testing, then what happened is that your tendons would absorb the carbon-14 and it would stay there, right? But, and this is a really key point, if you were born in 1948, which was before the start of the testing, 13 years before the start of the testing, then you didn't have any because your tendon had matured already. So what they conclude is that if tendons mature, the Achilles tendon matures by the age of 13, which is quite young, and lower than their first estimate in the first study, which is 17 years old. So this brings up all these, theories and thinking about, maybe, that's a problem because a tendon doesn't turn over and it's not going to adapt to load, and potentially that's an issue with developing problems. Maybe not, as we'll sort of talk about, I think, a bit later. The flip side of the coin is the tendinopathy sample. So matrix turnover is elevated in tendinopathy tendons is the second important heading in the results. And here they find that if you're born at the start of the BOM testing period, or just before the start of it, then the healthy tendons, as we said, will maintain high levels, but the tendinopathy tendons are all shifted to a lower level, and this shows that new matrix has been added later in life when the atmospheric level. That's completely wrong. Let me describe that again for you. So if you're born in 1948, so as we said before, if you're born in 1948 and you're a healthy tendon, you would escape because you'd miss the start of the BOM testing. But if you've got tendinopathy and you're born that time, then you would have carbon and absorb some. And this would still be there when they sampled, and that suggests that this 13 years of maturity is not happening for these people. These people with tendinopathy had more turnover going on. If we look at people born at the peak of the BOM period, right, so these are the ones that had the healthy ones that had the most. Again, there's a contrast with tendinopathy because they tend to have less. So this suggests that later in life, when the atmospheric levels are getting more normal, they then take on some of those normal levels, but they don't go back to completely normal levels at the time of sampling, which suggests that the whole tendon doesn't renew. It's only part of the tendon that renews. And they do some mathematical modelling and come up with a figure of 47% of the tendon may renew. So half of the tendon may renew, and it takes years and years and years. So that's an estimate of 15 years. So it's got an age of, or it's got, where did I get that from? There was something about the time of renewal and how long it was going to take. Can't find it. Too many distractions. Anyway, 15 years before. Okay, so the key points though are that that tendinopathy and healthy tendons are different in the way that they respond to these atmospheric levels of carbon-14, which is really fascinating. And what they've come up with here is the main conclusion that tendinopathy seems that basically half of the collagen matrix undergoes years of continual slow renewal in adults. So basically, there's two things that can be surmised by this, and one is that that the disease process has been ongoing for years before the clinical symptoms occur, or perhaps high matrix turnover is a risk factor or prerequisite for development of tendinopathy. So these people with tendinopathy have a higher metabolic activity and turnover in the tendon. So what I sort of started thinking about when I was reading this is presumably many of them have a really high metabolic activity and heal. Have a high metabolic activity and heal. So why? The questions that I sort of have coming out of this is, why do some tendons from a very young age have a high metabolic activity? Is it related to activity or other factors? Why do some develop pain? Because presumably not all of them that are like this will develop pain. Maybe they'll become stronger and bigger and adapt. So these I think are really important questions to understand why there's differences in how some of these tendons adapt and their metabolic activity. The other thing that I sort of got out of this is that maybe it's not a bad thing to have a low metabolic rate. Maybe having a low metabolic rate is better because these people didn't have the potential to develop injury, or maybe that's not true. Maybe there are other confounders there, which is very likely given the small samples here, activity and other factors. So this is probably more likely, I would say. Say we assume that people that are more active have more metabolic activity. Some develop pain, others don't. Others don't develop pain. What this then tells us is that the people that do have tendinopathy have a chance of renewal in their tendon, which again is a really interesting and important finding. And this takes years and years and years to happen. So it's almost like you've got to say to your patients, right, we're starting our rehab. So you see your patient first day in the clinic, rehab starts now. This is going to take 10 years, or this is going to take 20 years. Just it'd be a nice thing to say. I'm actually going to try and say it to one of my patients just to see the look on their face, but it's sort of realistic when you think about this evidence that the tendon does adapt. Obviously, pain changes much more quickly, thankfully, and so does strength. But we need to think about how can we optimize the environment and how can we optimize adaptation. So I'm sort of starting to think more so that adaptation is something we should at least learn more about, but understand before we make it a focus of clinical practice, because obviously we need to find ways to optimize the process, and I think it all comes down to understanding pathogenesis and repair. All right, so I think they're the main points that I wanted to get out of this paper. Once again, it's a really good paper. Have a read of it. I've linked some other papers on tendon cell behavior and remodeling. DeMoss, it's actually a PhD thesis from 2009. I've linked the Parkinson paper on proteoglycan metabolism, just the glycosaminoglycan metabolism, which is different. But again, really interesting study. Hope you enjoyed it. I want to finish off. Why don't I finish off with another shameless plug, and that is that there's a Melbourne tendinopathy course coming up, and that is coming up in a few weeks. Please look at the website for full details, and also thank you for everyone who's been helping with venues for the UK. I'm excited to say there's quite a few venues that I'll be doing in June in the UK. Looking forward to that as well. Fantastic. Thank you very much for listening.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.